Last time we talked about sequels that made their series better, but today we're looking at the opposite. These are the games that took great franchises and completely lost their identity. And we have to begin with one of the biggest wasted ideas in gaming, Watch Dogs Legion. We have to start with a game that had one of the coolest concepts on paper but failed miserably in execution. Watch Dogs Legion's big selling point was play as anyone. You could recruit any NPC on the streets of London, from a professional hitman to a random grandmother. It sounds revolutionary, right? But the problem is, when you can play as anyone, you end up playing as no one. By removing a fixed protagonist like Aiden Pierce or Marcus Holloway, Ubisoft killed the soul of the story. There was no character arc, no personal stakes, and no reason to care about the Resistance because every hero was just a randomly generated face with a pitch-shifted voice that sounded like a robot. The dialogue was generic and awkward because it had to fit every possible character combination. Instead of a deep narrative, we got a pretty playground that felt empty. London itself looked great, but the gameplay loop became incredibly repetitive. Without a central hero to anchor the experience, the missions felt like a series of disconnected chores. You'd hack a drone, download some data, and leave, only to do the exact same thing with a different character 5 minutes later. The permadeath feature was supposed to add stakes, but since the characters were so forgettable, you didn't even care when one died. It was a technical gimmick that came at the cost of a meaningful story, making it easily the most forgettable entry in the series. Assassin's Creed Rogue. Now, look, I know AC Rogue has its fans because you get to play as a Templar, which is a cool twist, but let's be real. This game was a lazy copy-paste of Black Flag. Released at the same time as Unity, Rogue felt like a budget expansion pack that they charged full price for. It used the exact same naval assets, the same animations, and a map that mostly felt like a reskinned North Atlantic version of the Caribbean. The story of Shay Patrick Cormac is incredibly short. You can finish it in a few hours, and his betrayal of the assassins felt forced because characters just refused to have a normal conversation. It lacked the epic scale and punch of Edward Kenway's journey. While it mastered the gameplay of that era, it failed to innovate in any meaningful way. Because it was developed for the older consoles, PS3/Xbox 360, while Unity was the next-gen focus, Rogue felt dated the day it came out. The naval combat was still fun, sure, but we had already done it all before. It didn't add anything new to the Templar lore that felt truly world-shifting. It's a safe game that exists purely because Ubisoft wanted to milk the Black Flag engine one last time before moving on. For many players, it felt like a distraction rather than a meaningful entry in the series. Just Cause 4. How do you follow up the absolute perfection of Just Cause 3? If you're Avalanche Studios, apparently the answer is by stripping away everything that made it fun. Just Cause 3 was about the chaos, liberating towns by blowing up massive structures and feeling like a one-man army. Just Cause 4 replaced that with a confusing frontline system and missions that felt like tedious chores. The technical side was even worse. Fans were shocked to see that the graphics and water physics actually looked like a step backwards compared to the previous game. They removed simple things we loved, like C4 and grenades, and replaced them with an overcomplicated balloon system that was more annoying than helpful. The world of Solus felt bland and repetitive compared to the vibrant beauty of Medici. The missions were the biggest letdown. Instead of blow up this base, it was protect this hacker while they stand in the open for 5 minutes. In a game built on movement and destruction, being forced to stand still is a crime. They added extreme weather like tornadoes, but they were mostly scripted and didn't add much to the actual gameplay. It's a sequel that tried to innovate by adding gimmicks, but forgot that the core of Just Cause is supposed to be simple, explosive fun. It took the most satisfying sandbox in gaming and turned it into a grindy, visual mess that most fans want to forget. Far Cry 6. I'm a huge fan of the Far Cry formula, but Far Cry 6 is the perfect example of more not always being better.
After the legendary peak of Far Cry 3, this entry felt like it was having a midlife crisis. The biggest sin here was the introduction of a leveling system and bullet sponge enemies. In previous games, a headshot was a headshot. In Far Cry 6, if you don't have the specific armor-piercing ammo type for a high-level enemy, they will eat a full magazine to the face and keep walking. This changed the game from a tactical survival shooter into a gear-checking RPG that nobody asked for. They also removed the skill tree, something that gave us a real sense of growth in Far Cry 3, and tied your perks to your clothes. It meant you couldn't just play how you wanted, you had to dress like a clown just to get a stealth bonus. Despite having a great villain played by Giancarlo Esposito, he barely had any screen time with the protagonist. The map of Yara was massive, but it felt hollow. The Supremo backpacks were a weird addition that felt more like Overwatch than Far Cry. It felt like Ubisoft was just chasing trends rather than perfecting the guerrilla warfare fantasy. It was Far Cry on autopilot, and it felt every bit of it. By the time you reach the ending, you're just tired of the grind. It's not a bad game, but it's a disappointing one that lost the dangerous, gritty edge of the earlier titles.
Battlefield 2042. On Sunday, we talked about Modern Warfare 2 being the peak of shooters. On the other side of that coin, we have Battlefield 2042. This game didn't just miss the mark, it missed the entire target. DICE decided to remove the class system, the very thing that makes Battlefield what it is, and replaced it with specialists who had cringe-worthy one-liners and hero abilities. It felt like they were trying to copy Apex Legends or Overwatch instead of being Battlefield. The maps were another disaster. They were massive but completely empty, leaving infantry players to run across open fields for 10 minutes only to get sniped. There was no destruction in a Battlefield game. The weapon count was tiny, and basic features like a scoreboard and a server browser were missing at launch. It felt like an unfinished building held together with tape. The launch was so bad that fans started a petition for refunds. The game lacked the grit and war is hell atmosphere of Battlefield 1 or Battlefield 4. Instead, we got colorful specialists quipping about having a good time while a literal climate apocalypse happened in the background. It was a total identity crisis that alienated the entire hardcore fan base. It's a textbook example of a studio losing touch with what made their franchise special in the first place. Fallout 76. If we're talking about disasters, we have to talk about the launch of Fallout 76. Coming off the massive success of Fallout 4, Bethesda decided to take the world's most famous single-player RPG and turn it into a survival game with zero human NPCs. It was a ghost town. The story was told entirely through holotapes and terminal entries, which made the world feel dead and your actions feel meaningless. The technical state of the game was a tragedy. It was packed with game-breaking bugs, invisible enemies, and servers that crashed every 20 minutes. The engine, which was already showing its age back in the Skyrim days, simply couldn't handle the multiplayer load. From the nylon bag controversy to the leaking of customer data, the launch was a PR nightmare. Without NPCs to talk to, the role-playing part of the RPG was gone. You couldn't make choices that changed the world, you were just a scavenger in a giant, buggy sandbox. Even the nukes, which were supposed to be the endgame content, often crashed the server the moment they hit the ground. It took Bethesda years to add human characters and make the game playable, but at launch, it was a slap in the face to every fan who loved the deep lore and character interactions of the previous games. It was a broken promise in the shape of a video game.
Dead Space 3. Finally, we have the game that killed a franchise. Dead Space 1 and 2 were masterpieces of survival horror. They were claustrophobic, terrifying, and atmospheric. Dead Space 3 decided to throw all of that away to chase the Call of Duty crowd. They added forced co-op, human enemies with guns, and a cover system. It wasn't a horror game anymore. It was a generic action shooter. The biggest insult was the microtransactions. In a game about scavenging for resources to survive, they added a store where you could buy materials with real money. The weapon crafting system was cool, but it made you so overpowered that the necromorphs weren't scary anymore. They were just annoying hordes you had to mow down. The love triangle story was weak and felt out of place in a sci-fi horror setting. Isaac Clarke went from a terrified engineer to a generic action hero who could take on armies. It abandoned the soul of the series to try and appeal to everyone, and in the end, it appealed to no one. EA was so disappointed with the sales that they put the series in a vault for 10 years. It's the ultimate example of how corporate greed and chasing mass appeal can ruin a perfect horror legacy.